2 words, just 2 words. It's mine. And then the sickening crack that echoed under the crystal chandeliers. 280 guests held their breath. A phone flashed red in the darkness, and my entire life pivoted in a direction I never could have predicted. When I woke up in the hospital 3 hours later, bandages wrapped around my head, I stared at the phone screen through blurred vision. The video of the attack at my sister's wedding had already hit 5 million views. After that moment, they couldn't write my story anymore. My name is Quinn Gallagher, and this is how I took it all back. But before we get to that ballroom, before the blood and the cameras and the viral infamy, I need you to understand something. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or had someone try to take what you built with your bare hands, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I promise this story is worth every second. Drop a comment and let me know if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. Now let me take you back. Let me show you where it really began. 6 months earlier, I stood in front of a condemned wreck on Juniper Avenue in the gray light of early March. The city had nailed a bright orange notice to what remained of the front door. Demolition scheduled for April 15th. I had my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, my breath coming out in white clouds, and I was staring at this corpse of a house like it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The porch sagged so badly on the left side that it looked like the house was shrugging. The roof had collapsed entirely over what I guessed was the back bedroom. Windows were either broken or boarded up, covered in graffiti that ranged from crude to surprisingly artistic. The yard was a tangle of dead weeds and actual trash, including what looked like half a washing machine. Most people walking past didn't even glance at it. It was just urban decay background noise in a neighborhood that was trying desperately to gentrify around these stubborn pockets of rot. But I saw something else. I saw the bones. The foundation was poured concrete, likely from the 1880s when this part of the city was first developed, and concrete from that era was built to outlast civilizations. The framing, what I could see of it through the gaps, was old-growth lumber, the kind of wood you can't even buy anymore because they don't make trees that dense. The roofline beneath all the damage had these beautiful Victorian proportions, a steep pitch that would have made the interior spaces feel cathedral-like. The front windows, even boarded up, were clearly original, tall and narrow, with decorative lintels that someone had carved by hand. This house had been loved once. It had been someone's pride. And then it had been abandoned, forgotten, left to die. I understood that feeling. My name is Quinn Gallagher, and I'm an interior architect specializing in historic restoration. That's the professional title. The real truth is I'm someone who sees potential in ruins because I spent most of my life feeling like one. The Gallagher family is old money in this city, the kind of family that has buildings and hospital wings named after them. My father, Gregory Gallagher, built his empire in real estate development. He's the kind of man who walks into rooms and expects them to rearrange themselves around his presence. Tall, broad-shouldered with silver hair, he keeps immaculately styled, and a voice that carries authority even when he's just asking for the salt. He's also a drunk, the kind who functions fine until about 7 p.m., and then the whiskey comes out and the volume goes up and the cruelty starts flowing as freely as the bourbon. My mother, Diane, is what people call a gracious woman. She hosts charity luncheons and sits on nonprofit boards and always knows exactly the right thing to say at dinner parties. She's also been playing referee between my father's rages and the rest of us for 30 years, and her strategy has always been appeasement. Smooth things over, keep the peace, sacrifice whoever needs to be sacrificed to maintain the image of the perfect Gallagher family. Usually that person was me. And then there's Olivia, my younger sister by 3 years. Olivia is beautiful in that classical, effortless way that makes people want to take care of her. Blonde hair that actually shines like in shampoo commercials. Wide blue eyes, a figure that looks good in everything, from designer gowns to yoga pants. She's been the center of attention since birth, and she's never known any other way to exist. My parents poured everything into Olivia. The best schools, the best clothes, the best opportunities. She was their showpiece, their proof that they'd done something right. I was the older daughter who liked getting dirty, who preferred blueprints to fashion magazines, who asked too many questions and never quite fit the mold they'd created for proper Gallagher girls. I learned early that love in my family was conditional and scarce. You didn't get it by being yourself. You got it by being useful, by not making waves, by fulfilling whatever function was currently needed. I became the functional one, the one who planned the parties I didn't want to attend, the one who smoothed over my father's business disasters with calm, logical solutions, the one who listened to Olivia's endless drama without judgment because someone had to. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't need their approval, but that was a lie. Every child needs their parents to see them really see them. I just learned to stop expecting it. I moved out at 22 as soon as I finished my master's degree in architectural preservation. I found a cramped studio apartment in a neighborhood my mother called transitional with a pained expression. I took every project I could get, no matter how small, refinishing floors for landlords who paid in cash, consulting on bathroom renovations, drafting plans for kitchen remodels. I worked 16-hour days and saved every penny that didn't go to rent and ramen noodles. I had a goal. I wanted to buy something of my own, something no one could take from me, something that proved I was worth more than the scraps of attention my family occasionally threw my way. It took 7 years. 7 years of saying no to vacations, no to new clothes, no to going out with friends because I was always working or too tired. My social life consisted of Jake Riley, my best friend from college who'd become a master carpenter specializing in historic restoration, and the occasional drink with colleagues who understood why I'd spend my Friday nights at salvage yards looking for period-appropriate hardware. Jake understood the obsession. He'd grown up poor, built everything he had with his own hands, and he knew what it meant to create something permanent in a world that felt temporary. When I found the Juniper Avenue house, I knew immediately it was the one. The price was absurdly low because of the condition and the demolition order, but I'd done my research. The Historical Society had been fighting to save houses in this neighborhood, and they had enough political pull to delay demolitions if someone committed to proper restoration. I bought it for $68,000, which was every cent I had saved, plus a small personal loan from a credit union that specialized in renovation financing. The day I signed the closing papers, my hand shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. The lawyer, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, smiled at me. "First house?" she asked. "First everything," I replied. She nodded like she understood. "Make it count." I didn't tell my family right away. I knew what they'd say. My father would lecture me about irresponsible investments and deprecating assets. My mother would worry about the neighborhood and whether it was safe. Olivia would wrinkle her nose and ask why I'd want something so old and broken when I could just buy a nice condo downtown. So I kept it to myself, my secret project, my proof that I was capable of something extraordinary. The first time I walked into that house with the keys in my pocket, I stood in what had once been the front parlor and just breathed. It smelled like rot and pigeon droppings and decades of neglect. The floor was so damaged in places I could see straight through to the crawl space below. There was no electricity, no running water, and something had definitely died in the walls at some point. It was a disaster. It was perfect. I took out my phone and started documenting everything. Every crack, every broken board, every water stain. Before photos for the transformation I was about to create. Jake came by that first weekend to assess the project. He walked through slowly testing floors, checking walls, peering into the exposed areas where the roof had collapsed. When he came back to the front porch where I was waiting, his expression was serious. "Quinn, this is going to take years, and a lot of money. Are you sure?" I looked at the house at this massive, impossible project I'd just committed myself to. "I've never been more sure of anything." He studied my face for a long moment, then grinned. "All right then, let's build you a castle." We started with the foundation. Everything else was cosmetic until we knew the bones were solid. We crawled through the cramped, filthy crawl space with flashlights mapping every crack, every weak point. The concrete foundation was mostly sound, just like I'd hoped, but there were sections that needed reinforcement. We spent 3 weeks just on foundation work, mixing concrete, installing support piers, ensuring that everything above would have something solid to rest on. It was brutal work. My knees were constantly bruised from crawling on concrete. My hands developed calluses in places I didn't know skin could toughen. Jake worked alongside me every weekend, refusing payment, saying this was the kind of project he'd been waiting his whole career to be part of. After the foundation came the framing. The roof was the priority. You can't restore anything if water keeps getting in. We carefully deconstructed the collapsed section, salvaging any lumber that was still good, ordering new beams that matched the historical specifications as closely as possible. I learned how to use a nail gun, how to read a level, how to cut angles that would make pieces fit together perfectly. Jake taught me everything with the patience of a man who genuinely loved his craft. Restoration isn't about making things look old, he told me one afternoon as we were fitting a new rafter into place. It's about respecting what was there while making it functional for now. You're having a conversation with the original builder. You want to honor their work while adding your own voice. That philosophy became my guiding principle. The project consumed me. I worked my consulting jobs during the day to pay the bills, then spent every evening and weekend at the Juniper House. I showered at the gym because the house didn't have working plumbing yet. I ate takeout sitting on sawhorses because there was no kitchen. When winter came and the temperatures dropped, I bought a space heater and a sleeping bag rated for -20 degrees and slept on a cot in what would eventually be the master bedroom. My mother called it obsessive. I called it committed. There's a difference. I didn't realize how isolated I'd become until Christmas that first year. My family had their annual holiday party, a lavish affair with a catered dinner and a tree that touched the ceiling of their grand living room. I showed up late, still in my work clothes, because I'd been installing subflooring all day and lost track of time. My hands were scraped and dirty despite scrubbing them twice. I had sawdust in my hair. I looked exactly like what I was, someone who worked with their hands, and in my family, that was practically shameful. Olivia, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, actually recoiled when she saw me. "Quinn, oh my God, what happened to you? You look like you've been living in a dumpster." My father didn't even look up from his conversation with one of his business partners. My mother hurried over her smile, tight with anxiety. "Sweetheart, you should have told me you were running late. I could have had something sent to your apartment so you could change." "I'm fine, Mom. This is what I wear when I work." Her hand fluttered at my shoulder like a nervous bird. "Yes, but darling, it's Christmas. Couldn't you have made just a little effort?" Something in me went cold. I have been making an effort every single day for 8 months, just not for this. I stayed for 30 minutes, ate some overpriced catered salmon, and left without saying goodbye. I drove back to Juniper Avenue to my gutted house with its naked studs and concrete floors, and I felt more at home there than I ever had in the place I grew up. The restoration took 14 months total. 14 months of permits and inspections and historical society approvals. 14 months of learning new skills, making mistakes, fixing those mistakes, and slowly watching something beautiful emerge from the ruins. Jake and I worked on the electrical together, hiring a licensed electrician to do the final connections but doing all the running of wire ourselves. I learned plumbing from a retired contractor who Jake knew, an old man named Frank, who chain-smoked and told dirty jokes but could solder copper pipe joints that looked like art. I learned plastering, the ancient technique of applying layers of lime plaster that would breathe with the house that would last another 100 years if properly maintained. The original hardwood floors were salvageable under layers of disgusting carpet and vinyl. We pulled up all the modern garbage and found honey-colored oak that had been milled from trees that no longer existed. It took 2 weeks just to sand those floors, working with progressively finer grits of sandpaper until the wood was smooth as silk. I finished them with a natural oil that brought out the grain, and when the afternoon sun hit them through the tall windows, they glowed like they were lit from within. The kitchen became my masterpiece. I found an original cast-iron sink at a salvage yard 3 hours away and drove there on a Tuesday afternoon to get it before anyone else could. It weighed probably 300 pounds and took 4 people to load into Jake's truck. We restored it, stripped away decades of paint and rust, reporcelaned the interior. I paired it with butcher block counters I made myself from reclaimed maple and open shelving made from lumber salvaged from the collapsed section of roof. The cabinets I built from scratch using simple shaker-style doors that would have been appropriate to the period but with modern soft-close hinges. Historical respect meeting contemporary function. The bathroom was the biggest challenge. Original bathrooms in houses from this era were often afterthoughts, and this one had been updated sometime in the 70s with pink tile and a fiberglass tub surround that was cracking and moldy. I ripped it all out and started over. Subway tile because it was period appropriate and timelessly beautiful. A clawfoot tub I found for $200 that needed reglazing. A pedestal sink with separate hot and cold taps like they would have had originally. Hexagonal floor tile in black and white. When it was finished, it looked like it could have been photographed for a magazine, but more importantly, it looked like it belonged in this house. I did the painting last room by room, color by color. Not builder's white. Not the stark cold colors my mother preferred. Warm, saturated tones that changed with the light. A deep sage green in the front parlor. A soft, dusty blue in the bedroom. Cream with warm undertones in the kitchen. Colors that made the spaces feel lived and loved intentional. Every wall I painted felt like signing my name. This is mine. I made this. This is what I'm capable of. When it was finally finished, I moved in on a Thursday in late May. I'd bought a few pieces of furniture from estate sales and thrift stores, things that fit the character of the house. A velvet sofa in burgundy, an oak dining table that seated 8, a wrought iron bed frame that I'd stripped and repainted. I hung curtains I'd sewn myself from vintage fabric. I placed books on shelves and plants in windows, and suddenly it wasn't just a restored house. It was a home. My home. I woke up that first morning in my own house and lay in bed listening to the sounds filtering through the open window. Birds, the distant rumble of traffic, wind chimes from someone's porch down the street, normal sounds, peaceful sounds. I'd done it. Against every odd, against every doubt, I'd taken something condemned and made it beautiful. I'd proven something to myself, something I'd needed to prove my entire life. I was capable. I was enough. I didn't need their approval because I had my own. Of course, I had to tell them eventually. My mother had been calling more frequently, her voice edged with worry that I was isolating myself. She didn't understand that solitude and loneliness weren't the same thing. But she was still my mother, and some part of me, that stupid, hopeful part that never quite dies, wanted her to see what I'd accomplished. I wanted her to be proud. So I invited them over for dinner. A real dinner party in my real house. I spent 2 days preparing cooking dishes I'd learned from YouTube tutorials, setting the table with mismatched vintage plates that somehow looked perfect together, arranging flowers from the farmer's market in a pitcher I'd found at Goodwill. They arrived on a Saturday evening in June. My father drove, of course, in his black Mercedes that probably cost more than I'd spent on the entire house renovation. My mother stepped out carefully, her heels clicking on the sidewalk, her gaze sweeping the neighborhood with barely concealed concern. Olivia emerged last, already on her phone, her expression suggesting she had somewhere better to be. I met them at the door, suddenly nervous, my palms sweating. My father walked in first, and I watched his eyes move across the space. The restored floors, the careful paint colors, the mix of vintage and handmade furniture. I waited for him to say something, anything. He pulled out his phone and checked his email. My mother made a soft sound that could have been approval or concern. It's very rustic, Quinn. Very you. Rustic. The word people use when they mean unrefined. When they mean not quite good enough. Olivia wandered through, trailing one finger along surfaces, her nose slightly wrinkled. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. It's so brown, Quinn. All this wood. Didn't you think about painting it? White kitchens are really in right now. This feels kind of dark. I'd spent 3 months on that kitchen. I'd built those cabinets with my own hands, sanded them until they were smooth as glass, finished them with oil I'd mixed myself to get exactly the right warm tone. It's meant to be warm, I said, my voice coming out flatter than I intended. It's historically appropriate. She shrugged. I guess, if you're into that whole vintage thing. Dinner was excruciating. My father spent most of it on his phone, dealing with some business crisis that apparently couldn't wait. My mother asked polite questions about the renovation that made it clear she hadn't really listened to anything I'd told her over the past year. Olivia talked about her engagement to Ethan Vance, which had happened 3 weeks earlier. Ethan was from money old pharmaceutical money, the kind of family that made my father look middle class. The ring on her finger was obscene, at least 3 carats, and she kept positioning her hand so the light would catch it. "We're thinking a spring wedding," she said, spearing a piece of roasted chicken. "Something big, something memorable. Daddy's already booked the Summit Crown Hotel's grand ballroom." My mother beamed. "It's going to be absolutely beautiful, darling. We're thinking at least 400 guests." 400 people to watch Olivia get everything she'd ever wanted while being congratulated for the achievement of being beautiful and choosing the right man to marry. I smiled and nodded and served dessert and felt like I was watching them through glass. They left early, claiming my father had an early morning meeting. I watched their taillights disappear down Juniper Avenue and felt something shift in my chest. Relief. I was relieved they were gone from my space, my sanctuary. That was the moment I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd spent so much of my life chasing it, twisting myself into shapes that might earn a kind word, a moment of genuine attention. But I'd built this house, this beautiful, solid thing, entirely without them. It existed as proof that I could create value, beauty, permanence completely independent of the Gallagher name and money and expectations. That was the moment I started to let go. Not dramatically, not with a confrontation or a declaration, just a quiet internal shift. I stopped answering every call. I stopped going to every family dinner. I was busy. I had my own life now, and that life was better without them in it. The house became my calling card professionally. I started an Instagram account documenting restoration projects, and the Juniper Avenue before and after photos went viral in the architecture and design community. I got client inquiries, actual paying clients who wanted me to bring that same sensibility to their spaces. I was selective, only taking projects that excited me, that challenged me, that felt like they mattered. My business grew organically through word of mouth and reputation. Quinn Gallagher, the woman who could see potential in anything, the woman who could take your disaster and turn it into your dream. I was happy. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely, contentedly happy. I had work I loved, a home I was proud of, a sense of purpose and accomplishment. Jake and I would sit on the porch I'd rebuilt on summer evenings drinking beer and talking about the next project, about the Historical Society's efforts to protect more neighborhood buildings, about his new girlfriend who was apparently perfect for him. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, but I wasn't lonely. I had built a life that felt full and rich and entirely mine. And then, of course, they tried to take it. It started at a family dinner I couldn't avoid because it was my grandmother's 80th birthday. We were at my parents' house, the formal dining room that never quite felt comfortable. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a sharp old woman who'd never particularly liked my mother and had always been quietly kind to me in that way that felt like the only real affection I got from the Gallagher side. She sat at the head of the table surveying her family with eyes that missed nothing. My father was already 2 drinks in by the time we sat down to eat. His face flushed his laugh too loud. Olivia and Ethan were there, being disgustingly perfect together, feeding each other bites of food and giggling at private jokes. The conversation was the usual boring recitation of business deals and charity events and society gossip. I was pushing my food around my plate, counting the minutes until I could politely leave when my father's voice cut through. "Quinn, you've got that whole big house to yourself now." I looked up, suddenly alert. His tone was casual, but there was something underneath it. Calculation. "I do," I said carefully. "Seems like a lot of space for one person. All those bedrooms." "I like space." He took another drink of his wine, swirling it in his glass. "Just seems wasteful. That house was meant for a family." Before I could respond, Olivia jumped in, her voice breathy with false excitement. "Oh my God, Quinn, I was just thinking about that. That room on the south side with all the windows, that would be the most perfect nursery. I was telling Ethan, can you imagine all that natural light and the morning sun? It would be so good for a baby's development." She looked at Ethan, who nodded supportively but looked slightly uncomfortable. My mother put her hand over mine where it rested on the table. Her grip was firm, almost painful. "Family is so important, Quinn. We support each other. We share. That's what the Gallaghers do. That house is part of the family legacy, even if your name is on the deed. We're a unit. I felt the temperature in the room drop about 20 degrees, or maybe that was just my blood turning to ice. That house is my studio, my home. It's where I run my business. It's not available. My father's face hardened. Don't be selfish, Quinn. Your sister is starting a life, starting a family. You're what, 32, 33, still alone in that big house playing with old buildings. Olivia needs help. Ethan comes from a good family, but even they can't afford what property costs in this city right now. You have the means to help, and you're going to sit there and say no. I looked around at the table, my mother's face pleading and anxious. Olivia's calculating behind the sweet smile. Ethan's uncomfortable but not objecting. My grandmother's carefully neutral. My father's red and aggressive. They'd planned this. This wasn't a spontaneous request. They'd coordinated this intervention, backed me into a corner in a room full of family where saying no would make me look like the villain. That house is not for sale. It's not for rent. It's not up for discussion. I stood up carefully, folding my napkin and placing it beside my plate. Thank you for dinner, grandmother. Happy birthday. I left before anyone could stop me, my hands shaking so hard I had trouble getting my key in the car ignition. The phone calls started that night. My father, his voice moving from suggestion to demand. You will not embarrass this family with your selfishness, Quinn. That house is too much for you. Olivia needs it. Ethan's family expects them to have a proper home, not some starter apartment. You're going to ruin your sister's future over your stubbornness. I hung up. He called back. I didn't answer. My mother texted. Long, rambling messages about family unity and how much she loved both her daughters equally and how I'd always been difficult. But she knew deep down I was a good person who would do the right thing. Olivia texted too, but her messages were different. Shorter. Meaner. You're being so selfish right now. Do you even care about my happiness? I can't believe you'd put a house above your own sister. I blocked them all for 3 days, needing space to think, to breathe, to figure out how to handle this. When I finally unblocked my mother and called her back, I tried to explain calmly, rationally. Mom, I bought that house with my own money. I spent over a year restoring it. It's my home and my business. I can't just give it away. Her voice was small hurt. No one's asking you to give it away, sweetheart. Just share it. Let them live there for a few years while they get established. You could move into the guest house or maybe rent an apartment nearby. It wouldn't be forever. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. There is no guest house, Mom. It's a single-family home. Where exactly would I live? Well, you could always move back home for a while, temporarily, just until Olivia and Ethan find something permanent. Move back home. Give up everything I'd built, move back into my childhood bedroom, and watch from the sidelines while Olivia lived in the house I'd created with my own hands. That's not happening. Quinn, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Think about the family. Think about your sister's future. Don't you want her to be happy? What about my happiness, Mom? Does that matter at all? Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe finally I'd gotten through to her. Then she sighed. Of course it does, sweetheart. But you're strong. You've always been able to handle things. Olivia needs more support. She's more fragile. You understand, don't you? I understood perfectly. I'd always understood. I just didn't want to believe it anymore. I have to go, Mom. Just think about it, please. For me. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up and sat on my porch swing, the one I'd welded myself from reclaimed iron I'd found at a warehouse going out of business. I'd taught myself to weld for that project, taking a weekend class and then practicing for hours until I could create clean, strong joints. The swing hung from chains I'd powder-coated myself, and it swayed gently in the evening breeze. This was mine. Every piece of it. Every decision, every detail, every drop of sweat and blood that had gone into making this place real. And they wanted me to just hand it over like it meant nothing. A week later, I came home from a client meeting to find Olivia and Ethan on my porch. They were standing close to the front windows, and Olivia had her phone out taking pictures. My security camera had caught the motion and sent me an alert, which was the only reason I knew they were there before I arrived. I parked on the street and watched them for a moment through my windshield. Olivia was gesturing animatedly, pointing at different features of the house. Ethan was holding paint color samples, actual physical paint swatches, and nodding along. They were planning what they'd do with my house, standing on my porch, without permission, without even the courtesy of asking first. I got out of my car and walked up the sidewalk slowly enough that they heard me coming. Olivia turned and her face lit up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Quinn. Oh my God, perfect timing. Ethan and I were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. This porch, seriously, it's even more gorgeous than I remembered. We were thinking for the renovation because obviously some updates would need to happen, right? We'd probably go lighter. The dark stain is beautiful, but it's a little moody for us. Ethan found this amazing dove gray. It's very Nantucket, very classic. She held out her phone to show me a Pinterest board. An actual Pinterest board titled Juniper House Dreams, with dozens of pins showing farmhouse kitchens with white cabinets, light gray walls, those trendy minimalist fixtures that had nothing to do with the historical character of the house. I didn't take her phone. I pulled out my own and opened the doorbell camera app Rewound to show them arriving 15 minutes earlier, watching them test my door handle, peer through windows, take dozens of photos. "You're trespassing," I said quietly. Olivia laughed that high-pitched, nervous laugh she did when she knew she'd crossed a line, but was going to pretend she hadn't. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We're family. It's not trespassing when it's family." "It absolutely is. You need to leave. Now." Ethan finally spoke up, his voice trying for reasonable, but landing on condescending. "Quinn, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Your father said you were open to discussing the house situation. We're just trying to plan ahead, be proactive. We're not trying to upset you." "My father was wrong. There is no situation. This is my house, mine. Not for sale, not for rent, not for discussion. I need you both to leave my property immediately." Olivia's face transformed, the fake sweetness dropping away to reveal actual anger. "You know what your problem is, Quinn. You've always been like this, so rigid, so selfish. You can't just be happy for other people. You can't share. You're 33 years old, living alone in this giant house like some weird spinster, and you can't even help your own sister. What kind of person does that?" I stepped closer, close enough that she had to look up to meet my eyes. "The kind of person who worked 16-hour days for 7 years to save enough money to buy this place. The kind of person who spent 14 months covered in dust and blood rebuilding it from literal condemnation. The kind of person who understands that boundaries matter and no means no. Now get off my porch before I call the police." Ethan grabbed Olivia's arm and pulled her toward the steps. "Come on, Liv. Let's go." She jerked away from him but followed, her heels clicking angrily on the wooden steps I'd replaced board by board. At the sidewalk, she turned back. "This isn't over, Quinn. You can't just cut us off. We're family. That means something even if you've forgotten." I watched them drive away in Ethan's Tesla, then went inside and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. Pure, clean rage that they would stand on my porch and talk about my house like it was already theirs. Like my work, my money, my vision, my entire life for the past 2 years was just raw material for their Pinterest fantasies. I called Jake. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey, Quinn, what's up?" They just showed up at my house. Olivia and Ethan with paint samples. They're planning how they're going to redecorate once they move in. Silence for a beat, then Jake's voice came back lower, harder. "What did you say to them?" "I told them to get off my property or I'd call the cops." "Good. Did they leave?" "Yeah. But Jake, this is getting serious. They're not going to stop." "No," he agreed. "They're not. So what are you going to do?" I looked around my living room at the built-in bookshelves I'd constructed, at the fireplace I'd restored tile by tile, at the afternoon light streaming through windows I'd stripped and repaired. "Whatever I have to. This is mine. They don't get to take it. You need a lawyer, Quinn. Not for after they do something, for right now before this escalates further." "I know. Do you know anyone?" "Yeah," Jake said. "I know exactly who you need." That's how I met Monica Thorne. Jake set up a meeting for the next day at her office in a sleek downtown building that screamed expensive. Monica was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a black suit that probably cost what I'd spent on my entire wardrobe, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that evaluated me like she could see straight through to my intentions. We sat in her office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and I told her everything. The family dynamics, the pressure, the uninvited visits, the assumption that I'd just hand over my house. I showed her the doorbell camera footage, the text messages, the documentation I'd started keeping. When I finished, Monica leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "They're going to escalate," she said matter-of-factly. "Right now they're testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push before you push back. The wedding is in 3 months." I nodded. 2.5, actually. Late August. "And you think they're planning to announce at the wedding that you're gifting them the house?" "My father's patterns are predictable. He likes public declarations. It forces people to go along or look like the villain in front of an audience." Monica smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a chess player seeing an opening. "Then we're going to let them make that announcement, and then we're going to destroy them with it." Over the next 2 months, the pressure intensified in ways that felt coordinated and deliberate. My father started calling my clients. Not to badmouth me exactly, but to plant seeds of doubt. "Quinn's going through some family issues right now, very distracted. You might want to consider whether she can give your project the attention it deserves." I lost 2 contracts. Jake heard about it through the professional network and confronted my father at his office, telling him to back off or face legal action. The calls stopped, but the damage was done. My mother ramped up the guilt campaign. She'd show up at my house unannounced with groceries or some excuse about being in the neighborhood, and she'd spend the entire visit talking about how stressed Olivia was, how the wedding planning was overwhelming, how they still hadn't found the right place to live, and the pressure was affecting Olivia's health. "She's not eating Quinn. She's losing weight. The doctor says it's stress. You could fix this. You could give her peace of mind." I'd stand in my doorway, not inviting her in, listening to the manipulation wrapped in maternal concern. "She can find an apartment like everyone else, Mom." "But she's not everyone else. She's your sister. Don't you love her?" That question always stopped me. Did I love Olivia? I didn't know anymore. I loved the idea of having a sister, of having that bond people talked about. But the actual person Olivia was selfish and entitled and cruel when she didn't get her way. I wasn't sure I even liked her, let alone loved her. "This isn't about love, Mom. This is about boundaries. Boundaries." My mother repeated, her voice dripping with disappointment. "That's what your therapist tells you, isn't it? All this modern psychology nonsense about boundaries and self-care. What about family? What about duty? What about the fact that we raised you, gave you everything, and now you won't help your own flesh and blood?" "You're right." I said, something hardening in my chest. "You gave Olivia everything. You gave her attention, support, resources, unconditional love. You gave me criticism and expectations and the understanding that my value was based on my usefulness. So forgive me if I'm not eager to continue that pattern." My mother's face crumpled. "That's not fair, Quinn. I've always loved you both equally." "No, Mom, you haven't, and we both know it." I closed the door gently but firmly and listened to her crying on my porch for 5 minutes before she finally left. The night visits started in July. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the sense that someone was watching the house. But then the cameras caught it. 3 separate times around midnight, a figure would approach the property. They'd walk the perimeter, testing windows, trying doors, peering through gaps in curtains. The footage was too dark to identify who it was definitively, but the build was male, and in one clip, the figure turned slightly toward the camera, and I saw enough of a profile to recognize Ethan. He was casing my house like a burglar learning its vulnerabilities. I sent the footage to Monica. She sent a cease and desist letter to both Ethan and Olivia the next day, legally warning them that any further contact or approach to my property would result in harassment charges and a restraining order. Olivia called me screaming. "You sent your lawyer after my fiancé. Are you insane? He was just checking on the house, making sure it was secure because you live alone and we worry about you. He was trespassing at midnight multiple times." God, you're so paranoid. This is what happens when you isolate yourself. You start seeing threats everywhere. Ethan was trying to help, and you turn it into this legal nightmare. Do you know how humiliating that letter was? His family thinks I come from crazy people now. Then maybe you should stop acting crazy. Stay away from my house, Olivia. I won't warn you again. She hung up on me, but the nighttime visits stopped. The wedding invitation arrived in late July, heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering. Mr. and Mrs. Gregory Gallagher request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Olivia Grace to Mr. Ethan Christopher Vance. Summit Crown Hotel Grand Ballroom. Black tie required. 500 guests. I held it in my hands and felt sick. Part of me wanted to just not go to skip the whole circus and avoid the inevitable confrontation. But Monica had been clear. You need to be there. You need to let them make their move. Otherwise, they'll just keep coming at you from different angles. We end this publicly, definitively, with witnesses and evidence. We make it so painful for them that they never try anything like this again. I RSVP'd yes. I bought a simple navy blue dress, elegant but understated. Nothing that would draw attention. I was going as a witness to my own vindication, not as a participant in Olivia's fantasy. The weeks leading up to the wedding were eerily quiet. No calls from my parents, no texts from Olivia. It felt like the calm before a storm, and I used the time to prepare. Monica and I met twice a week, going over strategy, reviewing evidence, making sure every document was organized and accessible. I gave her copies of everything. The original purchase agreement for the house, bank statements showing the $70,000 withdrawal from my personal savings account, records of the loan I'd taken in my name only, receipts for materials, contractor payments, permit fees, photographs documenting every stage of the restoration, all time-stamped and geotagged, emails from clients praising my work, my business license, my LLC paperwork, everything that proved the house was mine, built by me, paid for by me, created through my labor and vision. Jake insisted on coming to the wedding as my +1. You're not walking into that alone, he said when I tried to tell him it wasn't necessary. They're planning something, and you need someone in your corner who isn't being paid to be there. I hugged him, grateful for the kind of friendship that showed up even when things got ugly. Monica would be there too, not as a guest, but positioned nearby, ready to move if needed. We'd planned this like a military operation, and the goal was simple. Let them hang themselves with their own rope. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch swing in the dark, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. A dog barking, someone's television through an open window, the wind moving through the oak tree that shaded my front yard. This house had become more than a building to me. It was proof that I could survive without them, that I could thrive without their approval or support, that my hands could build something permanent and beautiful in a world that had always told me I wasn't quite enough. If they took it, if they found some way to force me out, I didn't know if I could survive that. Not physically, but emotionally. This house was my heart made visible. Losing it would break something in me that might not heal. So I sat in the dark and made promises to myself. I wouldn't let them take it. I wouldn't back down. I wouldn't be the functional, sacrificial daughter anymore. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would stand my ground. The wedding day dawned clear and hot, one of those late August days where the heat shimmers off the pavement and the air feels thick enough to swim through. I spent the morning in a strange, detached calm. I showered, did my makeup, simply pulled my hair back in a low bun. I put on the navy dress and simple heels. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked strong, composed, ready for battle. Jake picked me up at 3. The wedding was at 5 cocktail hour, at 6 reception at 7. We'd be there for the long haul. He was wearing a suit I'd never seen him in, and he looked uncomfortable but determined. You ready for this? He asked as we drove toward downtown. Not even a little bit, I admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. That's my girl. The Summit Crown Hotel was exactly as ostentatious as I'd expected. Massive flower arrangements in the lobby, directional signs in that same gold foil calligraphy pointing toward the grand ballroom staff in formal uniforms directing guests. Everyone was dressed like they were attending a royal wedding. Designer gowns, expensive jewelry, the kind of wealth that was so casual it didn't need to announce itself. Jake and I found our seats, table 23 near the back naturally. Not family table, not wedding party table, barely better than the vendors. The seating chart was a statement in itself. I didn't care. I sat down and looked around the ballroom. It was breathtaking in its excess. Thousands of white roses and orchids creating cascading installations that probably cost more than most people's cars. Crystal chandeliers that looked like they'd been borrowed from Versailles. Tables set with china that had to be specially rented multiple forks and knives and glasses for different courses. A string quartet playing classical music softly in the corner. Everything was white and gold and cream, a celebration of wealth and taste and the kind of beauty that money could buy. I thought about my house, about the beauty I'd created with my own hands from materials other people had thrown away, and I felt a quiet pride that no amount of roses could diminish. The ceremony was as expected. Olivia looked stunning in a dress that probably cost $50,000 all lace and beading and a train that took 3 people to manage. Ethan looked nervous but happy. My father walked Olivia down the aisle with an expression of paternal pride that made me want to laugh. My mother cried prettily in the front row. It was perfect, staged and perfect and utterly hollow. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," and everyone applauded, I clapped along with them and felt nothing but a distant sadness. This could have been a moment of joy for a family. Instead, it was a performance, and I knew the worst was yet to come. The cocktail hour was torture. People I barely knew came up to me making polite conversation asking about my work, careful not to mention the obvious tension with my family. I smiled and made small talk and drank club soda because I wanted to be completely clear-headed for whatever was coming. Jake stayed close, a protective presence occasionally steering conversations away when they got too personal. I saw my father across the room, already on what had to be his 3rd or 4th drink based on the flush in his face. I saw my mother fluttering between groups of guests, the perfect hostess. I saw Olivia and Ethan doing their rounds, accepting congratulations, glowing with that particular brand of happiness that comes from being the center of attention. Dinner was served at 7:30, 5 courses each more elaborate than the last. I pushed food around my plate and watched the room. My father was getting progressively drunker, his voice getting louder, his laugh more obnoxious. At the family table, my mother kept trying to get him to slow down, her hand on his arm. Her voice too low to hear, but her body language clear. He'd brush her off and reach for the wine bottle again. Classic Gregory Gallagher pattern. Start drinking at 5, be belligerent by 8, become mean by 9. Right on schedule. The speeches started during dessert. Ethan's father went first, a boring recitation of his son's accomplishments and how proud he was and how lovely Olivia was. Polite applause. The maid of honor, one of Olivia's sorority sisters, gave a teary speech about their friendship and how perfect Ethan and Olivia were together. More applause. And then my father stood up. The room quieted immediately. Gregory Gallagher commanded that kind of attention without even trying. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than the GDP of a small country. His silver hair perfect, his smile practiced. He picked up the microphone and tapped it twice. "I want to talk about family tonight." He began, his voice booming across the ballroom. People settled in to listen, smiling indulgently. "About what it means to be a Gallagher, about legacy and duty, and the bonds that hold us together through everything." I felt Jake tense beside me. This was it. My daughter Olivia is beginning a new chapter tonight. Marriage and, God willing, soon children. The next generation of Gallaghers and Vances carrying forward our family's traditions and values. He paused for effect. Several people nodded approvingly. In times like this, family shows what they're really made of. We support each other. We sacrifice for each other. We understand that what benefits one of us benefits all of us. My hands were clenched so tight in my lap that my nails were cutting into my palms. Here it comes. Which is why... My father continued, his voice swelling with emotion that I knew was as fake as everything else about him. I am so incredibly proud to announce a very special wedding gift. My daughter Quinn, my brilliant, talented, sometimes too independent for her own good daughter Quinn, has made a decision that shows what true family love looks like. He turned, scanning the tables for me, but he was looking in the wrong direction. He thought I'd be at table 7 with some cousins I barely knew. I'd switched my place card with someone else hours ago, moving to a table that gave me a clear sightline to the front, but kept me partially hidden behind one of those massive flower arrangements. Quinn has decided to gift her beautifully restored home on Juniper Avenue to Olivia and Ethan as a wedding present. A home for them to start their life together, to raise their family, to build their future. The room erupted. Applause, gasps, people turning to try to find me in the crowd calls of how generous and what a gift, and that's real family love. Olivia had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, in what I had to admit was an Oscar-worthy performance. Ethan looked genuinely surprised, which made me think maybe he hadn't been fully in on this plan. My mother was beaming. My father raised his champagne glass. To Quinn, who understands that family is everything. I stood up. The chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People turned. Click, click, click. My heels on the marble echoed in the sudden silence as I walked toward the front of the room. Jake was right behind me. I could feel his presence. The applause died like someone had cut the power. I walked slowly, deliberately, until I was standing directly in front of my father. He looked at me, and for just a second, I saw confusion cross his face. This wasn't in his script. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was so surprised he let go without resistance. I turned to face the room. 500 faces looking at me with expressions ranging from confusion to anticipation to discomfort. I found the words I'd been rehearsing for weeks and spoke them clearly, calmly into the microphone. That I said is a lie. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. That house on Juniper Avenue is mine. I bought it with money I saved for 7 years. I restored it over 14 months with my own hands and my own vision. I own it legally and morally. It is not a gift. It is not available. It is mine. My father's face went from confusion to rage so fast I could see the exact moment the alcohol and fury took over his brain. "Quinn, sit down," he hissed, his voice low and vicious. "You will not do this. Not here. Not now." "Yes," I said, still holding the microphone. "Here. Now. Because you've left me no choice." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough that I knew there would be bruises.